a principle by definition is a fundamental truth. It is a series of beliefs, of things that we hold to be true.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Carl J Cox here, host of the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. This episode is brought to you by 40 Strategy. At 40 Strategy, we help design world-class strategic plans, but more importantly, help keep you accountable to actually get it done. To learn more, go to 40strategy.com. All right, Kyle McDowell is a former senior exec at multiple Fortune 10 firms, turned best-selling author, speaker, and culture of excellence evangelist. He's a 30-year vet of corporate America, turned USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, executive coach, and inspirational speaker. The spirit of his message is rooted in the 10 W's, which we'll talk about today. Guys, Kyle's guiding principles and foundation for his book, Begin with We. And right now, Kyle is blowing up. Before we were recording, he's like, my book, Carl, I cannot believe it. It is 4X, 10X. It is growing like crazy, and he is super excited about what's happening. Kyle, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Carl, it is really wonderful to be here, man. Thank you for that really kind introduction, and I'm just really thrilled to join you.
So, Kyle, let's just start out with a story. And what prompted you that I'm going to write a book and try to inspire and change people's lives?
Boy, that is that's the question I've been wrestling with. Well, I was wrestling with about 2 years ago. So my book has been out about 15 months now, maybe a little longer than that. And I found myself at a crossroads, which is no different than so many, I'm certain, of your audience. And that crossroads had me questioning whether I wanted to go back into corporate America. I had just left a role where I was leading 15,000 people. I had 40 plus locations for one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. I left that firm, and it was kind of the departure was not what I would hope for anyone, really, but it highlighted the toxicity and dysfunction that I so strongly detest. So I left this organization. I had a 15-month non-compete, so I was kind of forced to sit on the bench. And the conundrum I was facing was, do I want to go back into the corporate fray and try to lead a big cultural transformation? Because there seemed to be a theme throughout my career that nearly every stop when I joined the team or a group of teams had, by most accounts, kind of a dysfunctional paradigm and certainly not a very we-oriented environment. And this gut check moment was, okay, dude, you created these principles. You watched really dramatic transformation in hundreds, if not thousands of people at the role prior to the pharmaceutical company. Do you want to go back in and lead that type of transformation, or is your purpose something bigger? And I ultimately landed on the latter. It was kind of funny because when I made the decision to write the book, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my wife for probably a month or so.
That's risky, Kyle. That is risky business, what you did right there.
Well, I'm the kind of guy, Carl, and I bet you can relate to this, that when I say something, it's on, right? I'm not the kind of person to say, I'm going to lose 10 pounds and then I just go eat burgers and fries. Like, I'm going to do it. When I say it, I'm committed. So I finally fessed up. That was the plan for me. And of course, she was incredibly supportive, but it started as a passion project. And the passion started, as I mentioned, a couple of gigs prior to the one that I just left. The passion project, I remember telling her, I said, Samantha, if I sell 1,000 copies of this book, I'll be over the moon. And we just passed 10,000 copies sold. As you mentioned, the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller badges are mind-bending to me, but it's not about me and it's not about the principles even. It is about, there is a hunger that I am sensing with you name it, whether it's a keynote client, an executive coaching client, and anywhere in between, there is a hunger for a different way of not just existing inside of the corporate world, but actually thriving. And I have made this my mission, man. As cliche as it might sound, I am so committed to evangelizing these messages and helping people get more out of their work lives, which, by the way, cannot help but translate into a more fulfilled and impactful personal life as well. So that's the road I'm on now.
Yeah, and once again, for those who are wondering what is this book, it's an awesome book. Begin with We, and it's been once again transformational. For those who aren't familiar with book sales, top 10th percentile. So meaning if you're the 10th best of 100, you've only sold 100 books. Okay, so to sell 10,000, that gets you into like the top 1%, probably, top 1-2%. Probably 2%, in terms of like book sales. And so that's no small accomplishment for those who aren't familiar with book sales. And so you are like at that point, and you get to that 30,000, everyone knows about this. And I think the title you have, Begin With We, is powerful, right? Because we can relate, right? From the beginning, it's like, I want to be a part of a great team. I want to do something that's different. Before we go into these principles, I want to just touch something for a second. I'm just curious. You've been in, career exec for multiple years, large companies. Are people still the same, or has things changed significantly over the past 30 years? What type of trends have you seen that has surprised you and kind of inspired you to end up writing this book?
Wow, what a great question. I think at our core, we are very similar to the way we behaved and interacted with one another inside of the corporate space for the last several decades. Now, it's no secret the role that COVID played was something probably that we're still lingering. It's still lingering. We're dealing with some of the kind of the COVID hangover. I'll say it this way: the nature of the problems that leaders are facing today might be different. The challenges even might be different. The solutions are all the same. People. So when I hear executives talk about the difference between leading, say, a baby boomer versus leading a Gen Xer or a millennial or any different profile or demographic, those challenges are real, man. They are absolutely real. I don't think it's any different than some of the generational challenges that happened in the 90s, 80s, and so on. But I refuse to say these challenges are something that we can't lead our way out of. I refuse to kind of acquiesce to some common thinking that it's just how people are. Because for me, the nature of the challenge is almost irrelevant. The solution is where we've got to spend our energy and focus, and that is how do we motivate and inspire and enable others' growth in a way that provides them fulfillment, reignites them with the passion that they probably had when they entered the workforce, but we do it in a way that galvanizes folks around a common cause and aligns people towards a common set of outcomes. So regardless if we're dealing with generational differences, or we're dealing with shrinking middle class, or we're dealing with gig workers or work at home proliferation, I think that solution in each one of those difficult scenarios is absolutely rooted in how we behave and interact with one another as humans, people first.
Your very first we, if I'm reading correctly here, is we do the right thing always, right? And that's a big statement, right? Always. Because people go, of course I do the right thing always. But folks, just let's be truthful here. How do I look today? Your spouse may ask. Okay, well, we won't go with that, right? But what do we say? You look fantastic, right? How are you doing today? I look great. I feel great. That's not true often, right? We don't say the full truth. But this is about doing the right thing, right? This is like when you are challenged with right or wrong and you head down the right path. So when you make the statement, we do the right thing always, give us some examples or an example, right, where people can justify doing something wrong and then it ends up having a significant impact later.
And that is, by the way, that's almost always what I have found to be the case, is when we make a decision to do something that is arguably not the right thing, there's this perception that nobody noticed, there's no impact, so why not? But that's a slippery slope. The more often that kind of corner cutting or taking the easy path out, the more comfortable we become with that, the more likely those little things stack up to be big problems. And, for your audience, it might be worth just maybe 60 seconds worth of context here. So I created the 10 W's the night before I was to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of an organization that I inherited back in 2017. I just took on a role that it was made evident to me that there was some dysfunction. There was some silos that needed to be addressed and kind of broken down. And the leader that I was replacing had a pretty crummy reputation, if I'm being honest. So the night before, I knew I needed to approach this group of folks with a different series of thoughts than maybe they had ever heard before. And I knew if I came in to say all the great things that I had done or what I was going to do to help this organization, the message would have landed flat. Because worth noting, the senior group, the top of the org chart of this team, their average tenure collectively was about 12 years. They had been in their roles or some variation of their roles for a dozen years. And so here's this new guy coming in, and if I'm going to tell them all the great stuff that's ahead, like you better be able to talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Like I couldn't just walk in and give, as I like to say, rainbows and unicorns. So that night before, man, I'm in my hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas, and about 2 hours worth of work resulted in 10 sentences. And I knew these sentences need to be clear and concise. The presentation was in black and white, just like the book is in black and white. Nearly everything I do now is in black and white because I needed folks to understand that there's no gray. These are the principles, and not to be too much of a grammar nerd, but a principle by definition is a fundamental truth. It is a series of beliefs, the things that we hold to be true. And I shared these 10 sentences. They each began with the word we and still do. And I'm not that creative, Carl, so these 10 sentences became the 10 we's. And they were, the caveat that I shared with the team was, these are the rules that will govern first how we treat each other. Because to me, if we've positioned ourselves to be high functioning behind the curtain, we are so much better poised to deliver external results. Our clients will feel that. Just like if we're dysfunctional behind the scenes, oftentimes our client will feel that as well. So I stepped on stage the next morning and shared these principles with the team. And fast forward 5 years, 6 years later, these principles are still the cultural manifesto at this 15,000 person organization. They have the 10 We Awards. It's part of their annual review process. That's the context under which these principles were created. I never dreamt they would take the life that they've taken. But when I was creating the principles, there was no question in my mind. The very first one had to set an expectation that we are going to do the right thing. Now, we can debate and argue over what is the right thing because it's rarely concrete, especially in business. As you know, there's a lot of shades of gray with what the right thing is. And I can't, I get a similar question all the time, and there's no one size fits all answer. For me, and I walk the reader through this in the book, when you're making a decision or facing a fork in the road as a leader, I like to encourage people to think through the lens with three different lenses. Is the decision I'm making the right thing for the company? And I can almost hear some members of the audience saying, okay, here's some corporate schmuck that's only interested in the bottom line results, right? And that's hang on. If there's no company, there's no what? There's no client. So let's think through the eyes and the lens of our company first. Is it the right thing for them, the overall company? The client, is it the right thing for those that we serve? Okay, here's another kind of some folks in the audience saying, well, it's still not, we're not really kind of being honest here. Well, the third C is the crew. Am I making this decision in the best interest of the company, the client, and the crew? If I can check all three of those boxes, it is a home run. 2 would be less ideal, but I'll live with it. And 1 is, it's a tough one, but I gotta move on. It's the right thing for one of those 3 cohorts. But what's conspicuously missing is me. We can never insert ourselves as decision criteria when facing a tough one. So I needed to come out of the gate really strong and conspicuous with my team to say, we will do the right thing. We can debate what the right thing is, but there'll be no corner cutting. It's rarely the easiest thing. Oftentimes it's the most expensive thing or more expensive thing, but we can always hang our hat on, we did the right thing, we have no shame, and our credibility is solid. So that was the importance of what, and by the way, if I didn't lead with this one being number 1, in my mind, the remaining principles are a house of cards. So I had to set that expectation and standard out of the gate.
Of the 10 that you have, other than that one, which one gave like the most visceral reaction? Where people are like, no, not here, or this can't happen, or I won't do that. which has been that one that's like always seems to be like you sometimes wonder if you go down to the 9 W's because it's such a conflict, right, of people when they're talking about it.
Yeah, there's two. There's a tie, but I'll lean into one because it happens to be my favorite also, and it's we number 8, and that is we challenge each other. Throughout my journey in corporate America, challenges were always reserved for the boss. They were always reserved for going down in an org chart. I have found, and I know you know this, Carl, and I bet most of your audience does, the best ideas come from those closest to the work. So, as an SVP or a C-level guy inside of a Fortune 10 company, it is unlikely that I have the best solutions. And it's actually unlikely that those in the top 2 or 3 layers of leadership inside my organization, that they have the best answers. So why would challenges be reserved for just leaders or bosses? So in a culture of excellence, we challenge each other means they come from peer to peer. They come from team member up. They come from boss to boss. They come in every direction. Because the more we are open about what's not going well and how we challenge each other to be better at what we do, the more tightly and closely bonded we become, because we're now more intimate with the details of what everyone else is doing. My favorite example of this is my staff meetings transition from readouts, right? We've all seen this in the corporate world where the boss sits at the end of the table, everyone on the team is around the table, and they go through their respective departmental updates while one person's speaking, the rest of the audience or the rest of the group is probably on their phone or in their laptop, not paying a whole lot of attention. Well, when you evangelize and desire to lead with challenges being on the forefront of what we do, you're now obligated, you're not allowed, you're not enabled, you're obligated to call out your peer or the boss. But there's a one-word sentence that I use at the end of we challenge each other, and that's diplomatically. Challenges must come diplomatically, and there's a second rule that the challenge must always be grounded in either data or experience. Otherwise, it's your opinion, and that can get us in trouble. But when this happens, and when the team starts to really embrace this principle, you can see people's defensiveness lower. You can watch how the best ideas start to become more of the path that we take, and not just because the boss said it. Look, I'm quite aware, as a senior leader in an organization, my jokes are always the funniest, and I always have the best ideas. Clearly sarcasm and not true. But when you're open enough and vulnerable enough to say, I need to be challenged, give me the data, show me the path that I'm taking us down is the wrong one, or confirm that it's the right one, but let's do it together. And you can't have that in a culture unless people feel safe to issue those challenges. And a parenthetical component to this one was there was a leader on my team, a direct report of mine, who thought I was completely full of shit. So she challenged me at every corner. She was difficult with me at every decision I made. And it challenged me, no pun intended, it challenged me to live and take my own medicine. The cool part about that story is she is now one of my closest colleagues. We have one-on-ones every 4 to 6 weeks, and we haven't worked together in 5 years. So the impact that we had on each other, I think, is really kind of poetic.
I love that example you gave of when you're the funniest person as the CEO. And I just, Kyle, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember when I was growing up the corporate ranks, and I said the same joke as a lowly controller, so to speak, and I might get a haha, a small little thing, and then I said the same exact joke as a CEO, and like the entire room starts laughing, and I remember going,
Belly laughed.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I did. I had this uh-oh moment. I was like, oh, people aren't
real time, Carl. You had it real time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was like this. Oh, people aren't telling me the truth anymore. And it was really fascinating. And that's why I love this challenge piece that you have here, because this is one of the biggest problems that our book, Lost as CEO, is because part of the lost part is there's this perception and belief in leadership that people are telling you the truth. And unfortunately, they can't. And why can't they often? Because they're worried about losing their job. That's providing for their mortgage. And so they're going to tell you what you want to hear often rather than what you should hear. So what's interesting about that, just talk about that piece right there. And it's interesting, you mentioned that one company where you had tenure average length of senior executives of 12 years. That's massive, right? Or at least the amount of people that are there. So you have this ingrained culture, right? So that's not easy to change when you have that many people. So how did actionable. Like, how did you slowly change this? You went to the point, it sounds like there was awards that happened literally as a result at the end of it. But how did you get people to expand that throughout the organization so it was a living thing, not just something within the senior team?
The way I approached it then, candidly, may not be the exact approach I would take now. And not to say that then or now is right or wrong. The principles were so new to me that, I needed buy-in more than probably just about any other role I had had to date. And I didn't want that buy-in. So let me say it this way. If you come in and you evangelize we, and you are on a soapbox saying how important we is, not how important the new guy, the new leader is, or not how important anyone in this room is, you run the risk of, if you force it on people and you create these awards and you have swag around the office and you have it on screensavers and wallpapers, and then it becomes less about the principles and more about this message that this guy is. It's more about me at that point. So I was intentional once I introduced the principles. I stood back, and there were and many members of that team would tell you, they would tell you that I was so worried that they were brown nosing. I was so worried that they were just telling me these were great ideas and that they were living them, but they weren't. So I was very quiet about it. But after a year-ish, I would visit the 11 different locations that this role encompassed, and I started to see signs on the walls. And they had different slants of, like, people, they spent their own local site dollars to create this environment that really cast a light on we in every single angle that you could find. So okay, we're onto something. It's not Kyle forcing this. Okay, but there's still a degree of brown nosing here. I think people might be doing this because they know I'm coming and they want to show that they're really engaged and connected. But then these We Awards popped up. I had nothing to do with it. And I was gifted a 10 We's coffee mug that I had nothing to do with. They started commissioning these things that I had nothing to do with. So that was then. Now I'm much more conspicuous about it. And the way that I was able to have these principles resonate and not just keep, but sustain traction was living them every single, and not just living them, Carl, speaking of them. So like, my favorite example is back to we number 8 as well, as we challenge each other, is Carl, if you and I had to have a difficult conversation, maybe your performance had slid or maybe you failed to deliver on something that you were committed to deliver, I would literally approach the conversation, hey, Carl, we challenge each other, right, man? And you can see the receiving end, the person on the receiving, you can see their shoulders kind of drop and like, okay, he's coming at me from a place of good intentions. So not only was it important to like have the signs and kind of use them in my daily vernacular, it was important that we emphasize them in nearly every interaction. So when someone stumbles, one of the principles is we own our mistakes. It's like, hey, Nick, I know you struggle with this thing, right? But we own our mistakes. I'm here for you. And more often than not, I found myself inserting the principles into the daily conversations, one-on-one staff meeting or whatever. And then I started to hear them being played back to me. And by the way, if you're uncomfortable creating this environment of challenge, again, as an example, you know it's happening when someone kind of underneath you or a direct report from an org chart perspective says, hey, boss, or hey, Kyle, we challenge each other, right? You're comfortable with the challenge now, right? When they start playing those principles back to you, it was like, eureka, we're really on to something here. So that's the long ways of saying you have to be very, very conspicuous because, believe it or not, anyone out there trying to drive a big cultural transformation or try to maybe approach their leadership gig a little differently than they have in the past, your team is watching to see how long you are able to maintain that momentum. They're watching to see if this is just another flash in the pan. You read some leadership book or you went to some summit or workshop and now you're trying to be that person. Your team's watching to see if you can maintain that momentum. And the first time they sense that you're not, trust is gone. And the whole thing, again, is a house of cards. So you have to live it every single day. And by the way, the woman that I mentioned earlier that was really difficult with me, it was not lost on me that we number 8 is we challenge each other. We 9 is we embrace challenge. If I did not embrace her challenges, it was DOA. The whole thing was DOA because others could see. She would do it in public forums, staff meetings. She would do it where others could see And my natural reaction after being a boss, quote unquote boss for 20 something years was to bang on my desk and say, damn it, Julia, get that to me. But then I would have been a hypocrite and the whole thing was dead on arrival. So you got to live it. You got to live it. It's a short way of saying it.
Yeah. You got to walk the talk, right? You know, it doesn't matter, you know, you have, I think you're 10 here that are brilliant, but it doesn't matter what your principles are. What's important is you staying consistent to them. Right?
That's right, Carl.
You know,
that's right.
And that's where, you know, this I think are common enough that you can take the next level and put in the how the habits are, what we do from a behavior standpoint to reinforce it, right? You can make that individualized, but these 10 are so solid, right, that you have in there that they're effectively, once again, principles or core values that can live as is. And then you have the behavior. And I guess, once again, you could say these are behaviors that we're doing, you know, that we're living and going through with. But it's fascinating of once again, of the living part. And, you know, I could imagine some companies, have you seen this yet, of companies who are embracing this? Do you see some say, well, we got 11 and others that say we're going to focus on 8? Or is it 10 or none? You know, I'm kind of curious about that. You know, it's like, do we have to do all 10? These are the 10 commandments, so to speak, you know, within the 10 we's, or is it okay to create our 11 we's?
The selfish thing to say is it's these 10 and nothing else. No 11, no 9. But that's not true. You said it, brother. The first step is to identify your principles, right? The things by which you want to be known. What is your leadership legacy? How do you want the team to view you? When the members of your team are at home at the dinner table with their spouse, what are they saying about you? What are they saying about the environment that you're creating? And whether it's the 10 we's, whether it is the 5, insert something here, I don't have a strong opinion. Now, I was careful to create principles that I felt like would serve as a kind of an insulation, if you will. I remember very vividly that night in Lawrence, Kansas, going through different scenarios. What if this happened? Or what if I was approached with that? Or what if, you know, and I wanted to have enough principles that we would be impenetrable. In other words, there's no single scenario to this day that I can think of that not one of these principles would apply. I should also add, and I'm really upfront and open about this, there's not a single principle of the 10 we's that you're going to see and go, wow, this is groundbreaking. And when I'm on stage, I even say, usually when I get to about we 4, and people have enough insight into where we're heading in the conversation or the keynote, I'll even say, I can almost hear members of the audience saying, no shit, Kyle. I can almost hear that. But here's the beauty of it. When they are combined into kind of a manifesto of sorts, they become much stronger than any one of them on their own. And while, of course, we're going to aspire to do the right thing, that's the first one that we just discussed. Of course, that we're going to aspire to do that. But show me an organization whose first core tenet, the thing that they hang their hat on, number one before anything else, is doing the right thing. And I'd be surprised that you had one. I don't see that or hear it very often. Now, there's a connection here, and this is a lot of what we do now when we go in and do organizational assessments or some executive coaching engagements is we map our principles to the company's existing values. Because corporate values and mission statements, those things are incredibly powerful, but I have found them to be much more important externally facing. They tell the marketplace who we are, what we do, what we stand for. And the principles enable those values. So these principles, they're the rules and kind of the guideposts for how we behave. And if we're successful at those, then the values take care of themselves. So it's one before the other. And I go as far to say, values don't mean a thing if we don't have principles that drive and dictate how we behave in achieving those values.
Yeah, you're nailing something that I think is huge here. And in the company where I was with for a decade, Lightspeed, that we did this really well. And it came down to these behaviors, once again, not these necessarily the specific ones, right, that you're talking about, but it's the behavior defining the core value, you know, going back to once again, because a core value is often like, I'll use the term integrity. Kyle, if I say to yourself, you know, to say to you, you know, you lack integrity, that's like, you know, calling your mom a bad name and you're going to, you know, get in a fight, right? That is not something you do. But if you say in our, you know, and using your example here, we do the right thing always. That's how we define integrity. That brings it to a whole different level because you could now have a conversation about that, right? You could have the conversation about it. And that's what I think is so valuable about this is often these wonderful core values that people spend hours wordsmithing and figuring out and get to, oh, we got our 5 and they're perfect. Then all of a sudden we don't recognize that we don't really know how to operate with them.
That's it, Carl. That's it.
And that's what I love about this, that you found a way to help operate this. And then I liked it how you compare it to the existing core values, because then you can live and breathe it and then go about it. And people are looking and searching, and why do they hire you? Because something's not working, right? People are not engaged. There's some reason behind it, whether it's a 100-year-old company or a 2-year-old company, right? We can do better, in every scenario. So I got to ask you some of my common questions here, Kyle, because we're, of course, unfortunately running out of time, and I've loved this conversation. So when you now today, from your business and you're going in to measure success, actually, I'm going to go back to when you put in the we's. Let's go into there, okay, when you were within business, if you may. How are you measuring success then?
Once the principles were rolled out?
Yes. How did you measure success that this is working?
Yeah, on 2 fronts. Well, maybe even 3. Data always is where I hang my hat. In this arena, it would be employee satisfaction survey results, employee engagement survey results, attrition. Our ability to attract and retain great candidates is incredibly important. And what I've found, when you create this environment that people thrive inside of, boy, do others want to join it. Especially this first organization I was in, I had 15,000 employees. 15,000 was my program that I ran. Inside of that company was probably another 10, 15,000 employees. And word travels fast. You can create some magnetism that others want to be a part of that. But I also do not lose sight. I never lose sight of the KPIs that kind of quantify whether or not we're doing a good job, whether or not that we are successful or not. And in my case, in this program that I led with those 15,000 employees, we had a 3 times a year survey that was given, or evaluation rather, that was given by our biggest client. And after these principles rolled out, we went on an unprecedented run of success, very quantifiable scores from not me, not subjective, but from our client. 3 times we went on, I think it was 7 or 8 different evaluation periods in a row. So they're trimesters, so 3 a year, for 7 or 8 different periods that had never been eclipsed before or since then. We achieved the best numbers in terms of attrition and turnover we'd ever seen. So very quantifiable metrics. And then I hate to say this because sometimes it gets a little kludgy and people think it's less real, but there is an energy inside of an organization. And depending on who you ask, you might get different answers about that energy. But the more times you ask that question or ask a question related to the vibe or temperature or energy inside the organization, you start to see the answers change, and you start to feel the genuine attachment to these principles that gets formed. So there's the subjective component that I don't want to overlook, and that is only found via lots of conversations and connected time with those deep in the organization, not just those with the fancy titles and corner offices.
Love it. Okay, we're gonna do this. We got 2 minutes to finish the next 3 questions. You ready? Okay, so number 1, what's one key habit that you do personally that has helped you do great performance consistently?
Fitness, without a question. And I'm always hesitant to give this answer when I'm asked it because there's a bit of pretentiousness that is almost in the car when you give that answer. But for me, just for me, I'm not pushing this on anybody else. When I'm up early, burn some calories, a little bit of resistance training, and have a good start to the day, my energy throughout the day and my commitment to what I'm doing is so much stronger than those days that I sleep in a little bit, I don't get a workout in. And for me, my wife could tell you by noon on any given day whether or not I've worked out that day or whether I was active that morning, because I'm a grouch when I didn't. So for me, fitness is huge. It's just like anything else in life. If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And I need to be challenged mentally, spiritually, intellectually, and also physically. And I think all of those are connected.
Kyle, there's going to be more questions I have to ask you. We might have to go to another podcast time. We are at that point of recording where we're capped out. To one final thing here for you. Of course, we want people to buy your book, Begin with We. How can people connect and learn more about you?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. My website is kylemcdowellinc.com, and essentially every social media platform is at Kyle McDowell Inc. as well. And I use those, and I'm glad you asked them, but I don't give them just for followers. I'm not chasing that kind of clout. I'm really invested in helping other people. So send me a message. Give me something to which I can respond. I'm here to help.
Awesome. Kyle, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast.
My pleasure, Carl. Thank you for having me. You're doing important work. I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kyle, thank you so much for being on the show. And to everyone else who's listening, I hope you've enjoyed. This has been an awesome podcast. Kyle has brought it today, and I love his 10 principles and begin with we. I encourage you to pick up the book. And to everyone else who's listening and wishing you the very best at measuring your success, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.